Idiot boys disrespect Royal Guard's horse, then this happens. Jake Thompson's thumbs flew across his phone screen as he updated his status. About to make history at this palace, smiling face with horns fire. At 16, with over 50,000 followers, he considered himself something of a social media celebrity in his small town of Essex. His latest pranks had earned him local fame, but today would be different. London was his stage now. "Mate, you sure about this?" whispered Tom, his best friend since primary school. Tom nervously adjusted his backwards baseball cap, a habit he developed whenever he thought Jake was about to cross a line. Behind them, their other friends, Marcus and Danny, were busy adjusting their expensive cameras, making sure they'd capture every moment of whatever Jake had planned. Street vendors called out prices for royal family merchandise, their voices mixing with the constant clicks of camera shutters and excited chatter in dozens of languages. But Jake wasn't interested in any of that. His eyes were fixed on the royal guard standing perfectly still beside his magnificent black horse. The guard's red tunic gleamed in the sunlight, his brass buttons polished to mirror-like perfection. The bearskin cap added almost 2 feet to his already impressive height, making him look like a figure straight out of a history book. "Look at him," Jake snickered, elbowing Marcus. "Just standing there like a bloody mannequin. Bet he's dying to scratch his nose or something." Marcus, the newest addition to their group and eager to prove himself, laughed a little too loudly. "Yeah, must be the most boring job in the world. Stand still and look pretty for the tourists." Jake pulled out his latest iPhone, a birthday gift from parents who were too busy with their careers to notice their son's growing obsession with online fame. He opened his favorite editing app and started planning camera angles. "This video's going to blow up, boys. Nobody's ever done what I'm planning." Tom's face paled. "What exactly are you planning, Jake?" But Jake was already in his own world, the one where likes and shares were the only currency that mattered. He watched as a young family approached the guard for a photo. The little girl, probably no more than 6, wore a plastic tiara and waved shyly at the guard. Of course, he didn't respond. They never did. That was their thing, standing still no matter what happened around them. "That's what makes them perfect," Jake muttered, more to himself than his friends. "They can't do anything back. It's like a free pass to do whatever we want." Danny, usually the quiet one, spoke up. "I heard they can actually move if someone crosses the line. Like they're allowed to point their rifles at you and everything." Jake rolled his eyes. "Urban legends, mate. My cousin's friend tried something last month, and the guard just stood there like a statue. They're all show, no action. That's why the tourists love messing with them." As if to prove his point, he nodded toward a group of tourists making exaggerated marching movements in front of another guard, laughing as they took selfies. The guard remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "See? Complete robots," Jake declared. He started walking closer to their chosen target, his confidence growing with each step. The horse was an unexpected bonus. Most of his research had focused on the foot guards, but this would make everything even better. Tom grabbed his arm. "Jake, mate, think about it. These guys are actual soldiers. They're not like those rent-a-cops at the mall you pranked last month." Jake shrugged off his friend's hand. "That mall video got me 20,000 new followers. This one?" He grinned, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "This one's going to make me viral worldwide." He pulled his friends into a huddle, away from the curious eyes of passing tourists. "Here's the plan. Marcus, you film from the left. Danny, get the right angle. Tom, I need you head on. I want every possible angle of this." "Of what?" Tom pressed, but Jake was already pulling props from his backpack. "First, we're going to test his limits a bit. You know, the usual stuff, funny faces, dancing, all that. Then," he paused for dramatic effect, pulling out a small Bluetooth speaker. "We're going to play some special sound effects. Horse noises, the works. Want to see if that horse is as well trained as its rider." Marcus whistled low. "That's pretty intense, mate." "That's the point," Jake replied, checking his phone's battery level. Nobody remembers safe content. You have to push boundaries to stand out these days. As they prepared their equipment, a tour guide led a group past them, her voice carrying clearly in the summer air. The guards are part of the oldest regiment in the British Army. Their duty to protect the sovereign dates. While they may appear ceremonial, these are highly trained combat soldiers. Jake tuned her out, focusing instead on his phone screen as he queued up his sound effects. The tourist crowd had thinned slightly during the midday heat, creating the perfect opportunity. He could already imagine the video title. Making Royal Guard's horse freak out. Face screaming if fear gone wrong. What Jake didn't notice was the subtle shift in the guard's posture, almost imperceptible, but there. He didn't see the way the horse's ears twitched forward, or how the guard's grip on the reins tightened ever so slightly. He was too busy imagining his future fame to notice these warning signs. "Right, boys," he announced, straightening up and putting on his best camera smile. "Show time. Remember, whatever happens, keep filming. This is going to be epic." As they moved into position, Tom made one last attempt. "Jake, seriously, think about." "Too late for thinking." Jake cut him off. "Time for action. Trust me, this time tomorrow, we'll be trending everywhere." He had no idea how right he was about trending, but for all the wrong reasons. As he stepped toward the guard, speaker hidden behind his back and phone ready to record, Jake Thompson was about to learn a very public lesson about respect, consequence, and the dangerous pursuit of internet fame. The midday heat started to fade as clouds rolled across the London sky, casting shifting shadows over the palace grounds. Jake positioned himself about 15 feet from the guard, just far enough to stay out of immediate reach but close enough for his planned spectacle. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy as he gave Marcus the signal to start recording. "What's up, fam?" Jake's voice shifted into his practiced social media persona, louder and more animated than his normal tone. "We're here at the palace with one of these famous statue men and his four-legged friend. Let's see if we can wake them up a bit, shall we?" A young couple nearby paused their palace photos to watch, the woman's expression already shifting from curiosity to concern. Jake didn't notice, he was too focused on his performance. "Hey, Mr. Guard!" Jake called out, adopting an exaggerated British accent that would make his viewers laugh. "Wonderful weather for a spot of tea, innit?" He mimed drinking from an invisible teacup, pinky extended. Marcus stifled a laugh behind his camera while Danny circled to get a better angle. Tom stood frozen, his camera shakily recording as Jake escalated his performance. A small crowd began to gather, but unlike Jake's usual pranks where onlookers would laugh along, these spectators seemed different. Their faces showed a mix of disapproval and second-hand embarrassment. An elderly man in a veteran's cap stepped forward, his mouth opening to say something, but his wife gently pulled him back, whispering, "Don't give them the attention they want, Harold." Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a plastic crown he'd bought from a street vendor earlier. "Look, I'm the king now." He placed it crookedly on his head and began an exaggerated march, swinging his arms like a cartoon soldier. "I hereby decree that all guards must do the chicken dance." A few young children giggled, quickly shushed by their parents. The crowd had grown larger now, forming a loose semicircle around the scene. Phones were being raised, but not to join in Jake's fun. These recordings had a different purpose. "Watch this," Jake whispered to his camera, pulling out the Bluetooth speaker. He pressed play, and suddenly the sound of exaggerated horse whinnies filled the air. The guard's horse's ears twitched, but otherwise remained perfectly still, trained to ignore such provocations. "Aw, come on, horsey!" Jake cooed mockingly, edging closer. "Don't you want to join your friends?" He played more horse sounds, mixing in some carousel music for added effect. The speaker's volume attracted even more attention, and now palace visitors were actively changing their routes to see what was happening. A group of Japanese tourists who had been posing for photos nearby lowered their cameras, whispering among themselves with concerned looks. A tour guide further back was speaking quietly into her radio, her eyes fixed on Jake and his friends. "Maybe we should wrap it up," Tom suggested, his voice barely audible. But Jake was too far gone, riding the adrenaline high of performing for an ever-growing audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, spreading his arms wide, "what we have here is the world's most expensive statue. Watch as it stands perfectly still while I..." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small plastic trumpet he'd bought specifically for this moment. The trumpet's tinny blast echoed across the courtyard, startlingly loud in the tense atmosphere. A baby somewhere in the crowd started crying, and several people covered their ears. The horse remained steady, but those close enough could see its nostrils flare slightly. "Jake!" Marcus called out, his camera still rolling but his voice carrying a note of warning. "I think we've got enough footage." But Jake wasn't finished. He had one more trick planned, something he was sure would finally get a reaction. Reaching into his bag one last time, he pulled out a small remote-controlled car, a last-minute addition to his prank arsenal. "Time for the grand finale," he declared, setting the car down on the ground. "Let's see how well this horse can dance." The crowd's murmuring grew louder, more urgent. A woman in a business suit was typing rapidly on her phone, her face stern. Several security cameras had turned to focus on the scene, their red lights blinking steadily. Just as Jake was about to start the car, a new voice cut through the tension. "What do you think you're doing?" A tall teenager about Jake's age stepped forward from the crowd. He wore a military cadet uniform, his face flushed with anger. "My dad's a sergeant in the guards. These men aren't your entertainment." Jake faltered for a moment, his carefully constructed performance hitting its first real obstacle. But rather than back down, he doubled down. "Oh, perfect. We've got ourselves a junior statue." He turned his camera toward the cadet. "Ladies and gents, the next generation of professional standstills." The crowd's energy shifted palpably. What had started as uncomfortable observation was turning into active disapproval. Phones were recording every moment, but these weren't the supportive fans Jake had imagined. These were witnesses documenting his downfall. "Last warning," the cadet said firmly. "Pack up and leave or..." Jake cut him off by pressing the remote control's button. The toy car whirred to life, shooting forward toward the horse's hooves. In Jake's mind, this would be the perfect climax to his video. The dignified guard's horse finally breaking its stance, maybe even rearing up for dramatic effect. What he didn't expect was the absolute silence that fell over the crowd in that moment. It was as if all of London held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The toy car zipped closer to the horse, its electric motor whining in the sudden quiet. And that's when everything changed, though not in the way Jake had planned. The remote-controlled car never reached its target. Just as it was about to make contact with the horse's hooves, something extraordinary happened, something that would haunt Jake's dreams for months to come. The guard, who had remained motionless throughout Jake's entire performance, made the smallest yet most significant movement anyone had ever witnessed. His head turned, ever so slightly, just enough to lock eyes with Jake. The movement was so precise, so controlled, it seemed almost mechanical. But there was nothing mechanical about his gaze. Those eyes, cold, steely, and filled with centuries of military discipline, bore straight through Jake's carefully constructed facade of confidence. In that fraction of a second, Jake felt the full weight of the guard's authority without a single word being spoken. The remote control slipped from his suddenly sweaty fingers, clattering to the ground as the toy car veered off harmlessly into the gutter. The crowd drew a collective breath. The guard's face remained impassive, but his eyes held Jake's with an intensity that made the teenager feel like he was shrinking. In that moment, Jake understood what prey felt like when spotted by a predator. Did you get that?" Jake whispered to Marcus, trying to maintain his social media personality, but his voice cracked, betraying his nervousness. The guard's gaze shifted almost imperceptibly, taking in each of Jake's friends in turn. Tom's camera dropped to his side immediately. Marcus took an involuntary step backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. Danny had already lowered his camera, his face pale. Then, with the same measured precision with which he had moved before, the guard returned to his forward-facing position. But the damage was done. The illusion of the guard as a mere tourist attraction, a statue, to be mocked, had been shattered completely. A slow clap started somewhere in the crowd, but it wasn't the appreciative kind Jake was used to from his videos. This was different, sharp, sarcastic, cutting. A middle-aged woman in an elegant business suit stepped forward, her clapping deliberate and mocking. "Bravo," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent courtyard. "What a wonderful display of everything that's wrong with your generation. Do you know what these men do when they're not standing guard here?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The woman continued, her British accent crisp and authoritative. "My son served with the guard. While you're here making a mockery of their duty, their brothers in arms are defending our nation. This isn't some theme park attraction. This is our heritage, our protection, our respect." The military cadet who had spoken up earlier nodded approvingly. Other voices joined in, years of pent-up frustration with disrespectful tourists finding a sudden outlet. "I've got it all on video," called out an Australian tourist, waving his phone. "Already uploaded to Twitter. Tagged the official palace accounts too," added another voice. Someone else chimed in. "Let's see how his followers like this behavior." Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. Notifications were already starting to pour in, but not the kind he'd hoped for. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Someone had been live streaming his entire performance, but they titled it, "Entitled Teen Gets Shut Down by Guard Ultimate Karma." The view count was climbing rapidly, and the comments. Jake felt sick reading them. "Check his profile. Let's make sure his school sees this. This is why we can't have nice things. Hope he enjoys being famous for all the wrong reasons." The guard remained perfectly still through all of this, but somehow his presence seemed to have grown larger, more imposing. The horse stood equally steady, but Jake could have sworn he saw a glint of satisfaction in the animal's eye. A light drizzle began to fall, typical London weather choosing the perfect dramatic moment to make its appearance. Drops of water rolled down the guard's immaculate uniform, but he didn't flinch. The same drops seemed to weigh heavily on Jake's shoulders, as if each one carried the judgment of everyone watching. The crowd had swelled even larger now, but it was different from the audience Jake usually played to. These weren't fans waiting to be entertained, these were witnesses to his humiliation, and their silence was deafening. The military cadet stepped forward again, this time with a hint of pity in his expression. "You know," he said, quiet enough that only Jake and his friends could hear, "these men train for months to maintain their composure. That slight head turn? That's the guard equivalent of drawing his sword. You should be grateful that's all you got." Jake's carefully constructed world of social media fame was crumbling around him. Every notification on his phone felt like another nail in the coffin of his online reputation. His friends had already started backing away, creating distance between themselves and the impending social disaster. Tom, ever loyal despite his earlier reservations, placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "We should go," he muttered. "Like right now." But Jake stood frozen, trapped in an invisible battle of wills with the guard who no longer looked at him. The rain grew heavier, washing away the last traces of his bravado, leaving behind a scared 16-year-old who had badly miscalculated. The toy car lay forgotten in the gutter, occasionally sparking as the rain shorted out its circuits, a fitting metaphor for Jake's short-circuited plans. His plastic crown had fallen off at some point, now just another piece of tourist trash waiting to be swept away. The aftermath of the guard's silent intervention unfolded like a social media tsunami. Jake's phone continued buzzing incessantly, each notification more devastating than the last. But it wasn't just online anymore, the real-world consequences were crashing down around him. "Excuse me," a stern voice cut through the rain. A palace security officer in a dark suit approached the group, his badge glinting under the overcast sky. "I need you gentlemen to come with me." Jake's stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the plan. His pranks had gotten him in trouble before, but never with actual authorities. Behind the officer, he could see two more security personnel approaching from different directions. "Look, we were just leaving." Marcus attempted to negotiate, his camera now hidden in his jacket. The officer's face remained impassive. This isn't a request. We've received multiple complaints, and we need to document this incident. A well-dressed woman stepped forward from the crowd. I'm a lawyer with Richards and Palmer, she announced, her professional demeanor unwavering. I witnessed everything. These young men deliberately attempted to provoke both the guard and his horse, potentially endangering not only themselves but also the public. More voices joined in, like a jury delivering their verdict. They were trying to spook the horse. I have the whole thing on video. My children were right here. What if the horse had gotten startled? The security officer nodded, taking notes on a small tablet. Each comment felt like another weight added to Jake's shoulders. The rain had soaked through his designer t-shirt, but he barely noticed the cold. Your parents will need to be contacted, the officer continued. We'll also need to file a report with the Metropolitan Police. The mention of parents hit Jake like a physical blow. His mother was in the middle of a crucial merger at her law firm. His father was probably somewhere over the Atlantic, flying to another business conference. They'd given him everything he wanted, except their attention. Now he'd finally have it, but not in the way he'd hoped. A young woman with a press badge emerged from the crowd, her professional camera protected from the rain by a clear cover. I'm with the London Evening Standard, she said, addressing both the security officer and Jake. Would you care to comment on what happened here today? Before Jake could respond, social media delivered another blow. His phone displayed a notification that made his heart stop. Royal family official has shared a post about you. The palace's social media team had released a statement. Today's incident at Palace serves as a reminder of the serious nature of the guard's duties. While we welcome visitors from around the world, attempts to interfere with our guards or their mounts will be met with appropriate legal action. The post was going viral, with major news outlets picking it up. Jake watched in horror as his face appeared in screenshot after screenshot, his actions being dissected and condemned by thousands of strangers. My dad's going to kill me, Danny whispered, staring at his own phone. He's already seen it. Someone from his office sent him the link. Marcus had gone pale, frantically typing on his phone. My football scholarship. The academy board follows the palace accounts. The security officer gestured toward a discreet side entrance. This way, please. We need to process your information and take statements. As they walked, Jake noticed something that hurt more than any official punishment could. The other tourists, families, children, elderly couples, were physically stepping away from them, as if bad behavior was contagious. Parents pulled their children closer, whispering warnings about those boys and what not to do. The military cadet who had confronted them earlier stood with a group of his peers, all in uniform. They watched silently as Jake and his friends were led away, their faces showing not triumph but disappointment, as if Jake had let down not just the guard, but an entire tradition of respect and honor. Inside the security office, reality hit even harder. The walls were lined with security feeds showing every angle of Jake's performance. He watched himself on the screens, but instead of seeing the confident prankster he thought he was portraying, he saw something else, a foolish boy desperately seeking attention, unaware of the dignity of what he was mocking. Your actions today, the senior security officer began, reading from an official-looking document, constitute multiple violations of palace protocols and potentially several laws regarding public order and safety. Jake hardly heard the rest. His mind was stuck on a single moment, that fraction of a second when the guard's eyes met his. In that silent exchange, he'd seen something he never understood before. True authority doesn't need to shout or threaten. It simply is. His phone had finally stopped buzzing, having run out of battery, a small mercy in the storm of consequences. But Tom's phone still worked, and the news kept getting worse. Jake, Tom said quietly, showing him the screen. You're trending at #1, but not like we planned. The hashtag Guardian of Respect was dominating social media, with millions sharing the video of the guard's subtle but powerful response to Jake's disrespect. But alongside it, another hashtag was gaining traction, hashtag consequences for Jake. The security officer's voice cut through Jake's thoughts. "We'll need your parents' contact information. All of your parents." As Jake recited his mother's law firm number and his father's international cell, he realized something profound. He'd spent years chasing internet fame, thinking it would make his busy parents finally notice him. Now they would have to notice. They'd be called away from their important jobs to deal with their son's very public disgrace. The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming against the security office windows. Somewhere out there, the guard still stood at his post, unmoved by the weather or the drama he'd ended with a single look. Jake envied that steadfastness now, that quiet certainty of purpose. 3 hours later, Jake sat in an uncomfortable chair in the palace's administrative office, watching his entire world implode through the screens of various devices laid out before him. His mother's voice, sharp with disappointment, echoed from the speakerphone in the center of the large mahogany desk. "Do you have any idea what this means, Jake?" Her words cut through the sterile office air. "I had to leave a crucial merger meeting to deal with this. The client's daughter saw your video and recognized our family name." A security official sat quietly in the corner, documenting everything while another officer clicked through dozens of social media posts that had emerged in the past few hours. The palace's public relations team had gotten involved, turning this into something far bigger than a teenage prank gone wrong. "Your video has been picked up by major news networks," the PR representative, Ms. Blackwood, explained while adjusting her glasses. "Even international outlets are running the story. It's being used as a talking point about youth behavior, social media influence, and respect for traditions." Jake's phone, now recharged but feeling more like a weapon against him, displayed notifications from his school. The headmaster had already emailed all parents about recent events involving our students, and announced a special assembly about digital citizenship and respectful behavior. "We've received calls from several educational institutions," Ms. Blackwood continued, her tone professional but stern. "They're particularly interested in this incident as a case study in their social media awareness programs. Your name won't be used, of course, but your actions will be analyzed by students across the country." The reality of his situation hit Jake in waves. His followers, once a source of pride, were abandoning him in droves. Prominent social media influencers, whom he dreamed of collaborating with, were making reaction videos condemning his behavior. Even his favorite gaming communities had banned his accounts. "There's more," Ms. Blackwood said, turning her laptop around. "Several veterans organizations have released statements. They're using this incident to educate the public about the guards' actual military service." The screen showed images of guards in active combat zones, their ceremonial uniforms replaced by tactical gear. The contrast between Jake's mocking performance and the reality of their service was devastating. "The horse you attempted to provoke," another officer added, speaking for the first time, "is called Warrior. He served in military parades for fallen soldiers, carrying their boots reversed in the stirrups. Every animal in the household cavalry has a story, a purpose, a dignity you chose to disregard." Jake slumped further into his chair, each new revelation feeling like another brick added to the weight of his shame. The military cadet's words from earlier echoed in his mind, taking on new meaning with each passing moment. His father's voice suddenly joined the conversation through the speakerphone, apparently having landed from his business flight. "I've seen the footage, son. We need to talk about your social media accounts." "But Dad, my followers are the least of your concerns right now," his father interrupted. "The palace's legal team has been quite clear about the conditions." Ms. Blackwood nodded, pulling out a document. "As part of our agreement to handle this internally rather than through the public legal system, you'll be required to post a formal apology. Additionally, you'll need to complete 200 hours of community service with veterans organizations." The door opened, and an elderly man in a suit decorated with military medals entered the room. "I'm Colonel Harrison, retired from the household cavalry," he announced, his presence commanding immediate respect. "I'll be overseeing your community service personally." Jake looked up, expecting to see the same condemnation he'd faced all day. Instead, he found something unexpected in the colonel's eyes, understanding mixed with determination. "You'll start by learning our history," Colonel Harrison continued. "Not just the ceremonial aspects, but the real stories of the men and women who serve. You'll learn why we stand guard, what those traditions mean, and most importantly, why that young guard today showed more power in a single glance than you did in all your misguided attempts at entertainment." A notification popped up on the PR team's monitoring screen. Jake's former idol, a famous prankster with millions of followers, had just posted. "Difference between pranks and disrespect. Know the line. Do better. Hashtag Guardian of Respect. Your generation has incredible power with these platforms," Colonel Harrison observed, gesturing to the phones and screens around them. "Today you learn that with great power comes great responsibility, and sometimes, great consequences." The rain had finally stopped outside, and through the office window, Jake could see tourists still gathering to watch the changing of the guard. The ceremony continued as it had for centuries, unaffected by his failed attempt to disrupt its dignity. "There's one more thing," Ms. Blackwood added, pulling out a final document. "The guard you encountered today, he's requested to be present at your first community service session. Not to speak, they never do while in uniform, but to observe. Do you understand the honor being extended here?" Jake nodded slowly, finally beginning to grasp the true magnitude of both his mistakes and the opportunity for redemption being offered. His phone buzzed one last time, a message from Tom that would change everything. "Found something you need to see. That guard? He's got a Bronze Star for saving his entire unit in Helmand Province. Still think he's just a statue?" 6 months later, Jake stood at attention in the palace courtyard, wearing a crisp volunteer uniform of the Veterans Support Association. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds, eerily similar to that fateful day, but everything else had changed. "Stand straight, Thompson," Colonel Harrison called out, inspecting the line of young volunteers. Jake immediately corrected his posture, a habit now ingrained after months of training. Beside him stood other teenagers, some former troublemakers like himself, others simply inspired by the hashtag Guardian of Respect movement to make a difference. Today marked the inauguration of the Youth Guard of Honor program, an initiative born from Jake's incident that had transformed into something unexpectedly positive. The program paired young people with veterans, teaching them about service, honor, and the true meaning of social responsibility. 6 months ago, Colonel Harrison addressed the gathered crowd. "A viral video showed us everything wrong with social media influence. Today, we showcase everything right about young people's potential for change." Jake's parents stood in the audience, and for the first time in years, they weren't staring at their phones. His mother had reduced her workload to attend his volunteer events, while his father had started a foundation supporting veteran causes. The incident had changed not just Jake, but his entire family. "Thompson," Colonel Harrison called out. "Front and center." Jake marched forward, his movements precise and respectful, a far cry from his mocking performances of the past. As he stood before the colonel, he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure in the background. The guard from that day, now off-duty and in formal military dress, stood watching. Their eyes met briefly, but this time Jake didn't feel shame. Instead, he felt something he'd never experienced from his thousands of followers: genuine respect. "Present the ceremonial guidon," the colonel commanded. Jake stepped forward, carefully carrying the ceremonial flag he'd spent months learning about. Each movement was deliberate, honored, meaningful. His social media fame had evaporated after the incident, but in its place, he'd found something more valuable: purpose. "For exceptional dedication to the Youth Guard of Honor program," Colonel Harrison announced. "And for turning a moment of disrespect into a movement of understanding, Jake Thompson will now lead the first Youth Guard rotation at ceremonial events." The applause that followed wasn't the viral validation he'd once craved. It was something real, tangible, earned through hard work and genuine growth. Later that afternoon, as Jake helped guide tourists through the palace grounds, educating them about the guard's history and protocol, a young boy pointed excitedly at a guard post. "Can I take a silly picture?" the boy asked his parents, phone already raised. Jake knelt beside him, speaking softly but firmly. How about instead I show you how to stand like a real guard? They train for months to perfect their posture. Would you like to learn? The boy's eyes lit up, and soon Jake was teaching him the proper stance, explaining the meaning behind each movement. Nearby tourists lowered their phones, more interested in the authentic lesson than in capturing mock-worthy moments. Well done, a familiar voice said behind him. Jake turned to find the military cadet from that day, now a friend and fellow volunteer. You've come a long way from plastic crowns and remote-control cars. Jake smiled, watching as more children gathered around, eager to learn the proper way to appreciate the palace traditions. His phone lay forgotten in his pocket, silent now that he'd stopped chasing likes and started living for something bigger than viral fame. The afternoon sun caught the brass buttons of his volunteer uniform, reminding him of how the guard's tunic had gleamed that day. But now he understood, the shine wasn't just for show. It represented dedication, discipline, and devotion to duty. As the day drew to a close, Jake stood at his post near the palace gates, helping coordinate the last tour groups. A notification buzzed on his phone. His first social media post in months had gone viral, but for all the right reasons. It was a simple educational video about the Guard's history, co-created with Colonel Harrison and the Veterans Organization. The comments were different now. Finally, someone showing proper respect. This is what social media should be used for. Thank you for teaching us the real meaning behind the tradition. The guard he'd once mocked was ending his shift, marching past with the same impeccable precision. But this time, Jake stood straight, offering a proper salute, not for show, not for cameras, but out of genuine respect. The guard returned the salute with a subtle nod, an acknowledgement of how far Jake had come. As darkness fell over London, Jake helped take down the Youth Guard of Honor banner. His reflection in the palace windows showed someone different from the attention-seeking teenager of 6 months ago. The transformation wasn't just physical, it went soul-deep. Ready to call it a day? Colonel Harrison asked, approaching with pride in his eyes. Actually, sir, Jake replied. I'd like to stay and help the evening shift, if that's all right. There's a school group coming tomorrow, and I want to make sure everything's perfect for their tour. The colonel smiled knowingly. Carry on then, Thompson. Carry on. And so Jake did, having learned that true respect isn't about standing still, it's about standing up for something greater than yourself. His viral moment had faded into history, but his legacy was just beginning, one honorable act at a time.